Hello, ladies. Hello, gentlemen. Welcome to the Center for Civil Society's webinar on donor-advised fiends. I don't know who writes the titles for these things. I think it was me in this case, but we're going to have a great discussion about donor-advised funds today. And I have a little script, and I'm going to read it to you. I'm Jack Fowler. I'm a senior fellow at the Center for Civil Society, and I'm also the senior director of strategic partnerships at AmFil. And normally I don't wear a hoodie, but I am today because it's an AmFil hoodie, and I just want to show my loyalty to the mothership. So, speaking of AmFil, my AmFil colleague Jeremy Beer, I'm going to show his book, Quest for Belonging, drills down on the position that philanthropy is about the donor. The most profound tale of charity is from the Bible. It is Jesus's parable about the Good Samaritan. It's called the Good Samaritan. It's not called the robbed and beaten man. Its focus is on the agent of charity. 2 millennia later, excuse my Bronx accent, a lot of people still don't get that salient point. Donors can get smacked around and disrespected, even in things called donor-advised funds, which in turn are things, let's call them financial tools or instruments that are the target of a lot of folks, especially ideological folks, and from a lot of massive grant-making foundations. So our objective here in this webinar, we'll be here for an hour, is threefold. The first is to get a clear idea of just what a donor advised fund is and why these are instruments that should be considered by people of charity. The second objective is to understand how, in some massive financial institutions which operate DAFs, ideology can dictate, and often does dictate, to the shock of the donor who finds out that his intent has been obstructed. And the third objective is to get a broader idea of the ideological opposition to some of these funds, these forces that seek legislative and jurisprudential restrictions that come smack against First Amendment rights to privacy and association, which are very much part of DAFs. On hand to share wisdom and perspective to provide all watching the Center for Civil Society webinar some de facto do's and don'ts and worthwhile guidance are three very wise people, all friends, and we will see if they remain so at the conclusion of this hour, with great chops in DAPS. And I'm going to introduce them here in a second. Before I do, I want to thank you again, folks, for joining us. And if you have questions during the course of today's webinar, there's a little question doohickey somewhere on the bottom of the screen. I think you can pose your question, and I hope we'll have time to get to them. First, ladies first, Celia Deem, who is oversees she's the director and leader of donor advisory services at AmFil, where she advises leading individual and institutional donors on strategy, donor intent, evaluation, governance, operations, and capacity building. Prior to AmFil, Celia had positions at the Philanthropy Roundtable, Americans for Prosperity and its foundation, the National Museum of Women in the Arts. She's a graduate of Mary Baldwin Women's College, and she lives in the greater Baltimore area with her philosopher husband and 3 children. I held one of her children once. I did not drop him or her, I forget. Gabe Conger.
2 of my children.
No. I did. Oh, hell, 2.
Don't drop them.
There's going to be a first at some point. Gabe Conger is president of the Bradley Impact Fund, which is a pioneering donor-advised fund for conservative philanthropists committed to restoring, strengthening, and protecting America's founding principles and institutions. Since joining the Impact Fund, it has grown by 1,700%. Prior to that, Gabe was a director of external relations at the Bradley Foundation and an advisor to the president of the Heritage Foundation on donor relations. He's a graduate of Creighton University, go Bob Gibson, and lives in Wisconsin with his wife and two children. And then last but not least is Peter Lipset, who's the vice president of Donors Trust, the country's oldest and largest community foundation serving conservative and libertarian donors. He drives Donors Trust's growth through outreach and marketing. He's founded the Novus Society, which is Donor Trust network of donors under 40. He hosts the podcast Giving Ventures. Prior to Donors Trust, Peter spent a decade in the Koch organizations, helping build a unique donor network. He's on a lot of boards, this guy. He's on America's Future, where he's the board chairman, Emergent Order Foundation, Thomas Jefferson Institute, and the Virginia Frontier of Culture Museum in Staunton, Virginia. Didn't Woodrow Wilson come from Staunton?
Yeah, we don't really speak of that.
Sorry, okay.
But that is where Celia went to college.
Okay, 2 strikes here. Peter and his wife and daughters live in the mountains of Lexington, Virginia. And I want to thank you all, my friends, for being here. And Gabe, I want to start with you. Let's start with basics and we'll work up to aggravation and animus. Gabe, eventually I'm going to ask you about the Bradley Impact Fund itself. But for starters, I'm of the impression that many people may be ignorant or fuzzy or confused about what exactly a donor advised fund is. So tell us, what is a DAF and how does it benefit donors? And Peter, you can later fill in if there's anything you want to add to what Gabe says, you can do that when I get to you. But Gabe, give us the rundown on just what is a DAF.
Sure. And I want to first start by just being impressed by the Bob Gibson Creighton reference.
I didn't say Willis Reed either. I should have said that, but go ahead.
Anyway, bring all the way to Doug McDermott and Cal Corver. Anyway, we're here to talk about DAFs. So donor advised funds, if you think about it in terms of philanthropy and charitable giving, we're a public donor advised fund sponsoring organizations are public charities. The difference being donors contribute, you receive an immediate fair market value tax deduction, similar to a public charity, and then those funds go into an account which then can be invested over time. And then you, the donor, maintain advisory privileges to then make recommendations out of that account to other charities. And so kind of there's, broadly speaking, 2 categories and a mix in between of how people kind of working with DAFs. And so one is more, you can think of it as a charitable checking account. So especially right now, the market's up a lot. And a lot of people making gifts to charity, considering year end, maybe meet with an accountant, financial advisor, make decisions about what you're going to give to charity, instead of transferring appreciated assets to dozens or hundreds of charities, as in the cases with some of the folks that we work with. You make one transfer into your donor advised account, receive one receipt or tax acknowledgement, and then from there you're directing those funds out. So that's kind of the charitable checking account. The other kind of example is more of a charitable savings account. So let's say you're selling a business, have some sort of other significant wealth event, where you're charitably inclined and want to support a number of organizations. However, the proceeds of that sale before or after or thereabouts go into an account, and then that's invested over time. And so you're giving out more kind of like a private non-operating foundation, but you're giving to a public charity, so that the tax benefits are more. I've described donor advised funds as a win-win lose. You're winning from a tax saving, you're winning for the donor, and the IRS is losing because the IRS is getting less of your money.
So. Hooray. Gabe, I'm going to get to the motivations behind the creation of the Bradley Impact Fund, but right now, could you just quickly give us down low here on how many people does it serve, if I can use that term? How much money does it give out? What's its rate of growth over the last couple of years?
Yeah, so the Impact Fund, we currently have about 300 formal account holders and work with several hundred other donors in different kinds of ways. We grant out anywhere from 50 to 65 million on an annual basis, with close to a couple $100 million in assets currently.
Okay. Peter, again, thanks for joining us. Do you have any overview of DAFs to add to what Gabe explained?
The only thing I'll add is the fact that, and Gabe gave a good kind of nuts and bolts description of what it does. There's also different flavors of donor advised funds. I mean, there's really kind of three main types that you can think of. There's your ones that are affiliated with the big banks out there, your Fidelity Charitable, Schwab Charitable, Vanguard Charitable, Goldman Sachs. I mean, any of the big banks have these. So that's kind of the one, big ones, general purpose. We'll pick on them later. Then there's the community foundations, the geographically bound community foundations that you probably have in your communities there, wherever you live, whether that's really local or a big metro Atlanta kind of big geographic area, but more focused on the geography. And then there's what gets called either single issue or mission driven funds. That's kind of like Bradley Impact Fund, like Donors Trust. Yale University has a donor advised fund. On the left, there's the Tides Foundation. These funds that are really not attached to a bank, they're not necessarily attached to geography, but have some kind of interest that brings people together. And as donor advised funds have grown, people have realized, oh, they don't just have to go to the big bank. There are these different things that they can do. So I think that's an important thing to kind of understand.
Peter, what are the numbers for Donors Trust? How many people are I'll call them members. We can discuss that term later if you want. And how much you're giving out a year? How's the growth of the institution?
Yeah, so Donors Trust has been around for 25 years, founded very end of 1999. And in that time, we've given away about $2.5 billion in grants, brought in about 4 billion contributions. This year, we'll give away somewhere between 300 and $400 million to hundreds, if not thousands, of charities. About 60% of those are in the public policy space, kind of writ large. And then the rest are, churches and civic groups and arts and education, et cetera. And so a real broad base of giving all the way across the country, but really founded on that idea of preserving donor intent and helping to grow the liberty movement and connect those donors to that broader idea.
Well, let's a little more on that, if you don't mind, Peter, because as you just touched on, I mean, there are lots of fish in the sea. I mean, you can give us a number. I'm sure you know better than I, because I don't know it all. So you better know, like, just how many DAFs are out there in America, and then what makes Donors Trust particularly different. And then, if you don't mind, also when you get through with that, just tell us how Donors Trust started. What was the instigation of it?
I mean, the pithy answer was there was a need for it. Like Donors Trust needed to be created. Something needed to be created to fill that void because back in the late 90s, Fidelity Charitable was out there and it was doing its thing. People didn't really understand donor advised funds, but some people did. The Tides Foundation has started out on the West Coast, really focused on progressive causes and getting those donors engaged, connected with the donor advised fund. And our co-founder, Kim Dennis, who also helped start the Philanthropy Roundtable, which many of you on here may be familiar with, saw a need to help the donors have a way to give that aligned with their values, that could be done confidently, privately, and really advance those conservative libertarian ideas. And so had a donor who had some of those same concerns and connected that, brought Whitney Ball in to help get up and running and run the day-to-day of it. And that led to the creation of it, to really be that place to protect the donor intent for conservative libertarian donors out there. And it's just a really unique position.
What do you think? How many DAFs are there in America?
There's about 1,000, probably north of that now. Could be closing in on 11 or 1,200, but about 11, let's call it 1,000 different DAF providers out there. And
Celia,
most of them are these single issue or these community foundations.
Yeah. So Celia, dear colleague, what are some of those not named Bradley Impact Fund, not named Donors Trust that you think are of interest that as you do your work at Amphil? I'm going to ask you in a minute what exactly do you do at Amphil? But give us some reliable alternatives in the DAF world.
Well, Jack, you can ask me anything, but don't ask me what I do at Amphil. Okay. I can't answer questions there's no answer to. Yeah, I think you all alluded already to kind of Vanguard and Schwab. Obviously there's the really big, the big ones associated with financial institutions. I I also am a big fan of the National Christian Foundation as another DAF option. I cannot speak to pricing and all of those things, which I'm sure Peter and Gabe both could. But from a philosophical alignment perspective, I mean, it's in the title. It's Christian. It's not as much oriented towards public policy, although there are certainly people who do public policy giving out of that. But National Christian Foundation has been a great partner for us, and we've had the privilege of working with a number of donors who hold their accounts there. Another one. This is on the newer side, but the Knights of Columbus has also recently launched a donor advised fund. I'm going to say recent, and then someone's going to say it's been like 15 years. But in my mind, it was recent. I think it's been like 5 years. Yeah. Okay. So I think that's small but growing. That's nichely for Catholics. Not that you have to be Catholic to use it. I just don't know why you would if you're not Catholic. But if you are Catholic, there's the benefit there of feeling really good about all the investments aligning with your bioethical concerns and whatnot.
Celia, tell us briefly, if you don't mind, tell us about what you do at AmPhil, and then I have a very long-winded question for you following that.
Okay. At AmPhil, as the director of donor advisory, I get to work with foundations and individual donors to advise, assist, and facilitate their giving. So that looks different for all of our clients. It might be working on a scholarship program, a prize program for one client. It might be doing due diligence or grantee research. We do a lot of giving assessments. It's actually hard. It's difficult for fundraisers to really consider this, but it is hard to give away money. And one of the reasons it's hard is because you don't really get feedback on it, right? Hopefully you're not giving money to anyone who's saying you're doing a bad job giving money, right? Like what you hear is gratitude, and hope you're probably going to hear what your grantees think you want to hear. So we can come in and help do some third-party assessments and things like that. So that's where I spend most of my time, Jack.
Okay.
And now on lovely webinars like this.
Okay. Here's a 17-part question. Celia, in your donor advisory capacity, would you share what are any common or consistent things you see about donor attitudes towards donor advised funds? And for example, I'm curious, do you find there is sufficient understanding of what DAFs do and what benefits they offer? Are there things donors assume about DAFs that are unrealistic? And one more big one here. Also, do you find a bit of maybe I'll say laziness in some donors? Why, after all, would a center-right person find solace in a big brand name financial institution who've been obstructionist when it comes to distributing DAF funds to conservative nonprofits? And that's something we're going to talk about a little more. So what's your experience in these ways?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it just follows whoever you're already working with as your financial planner or your financial advisor. So I think that unless you are really highly religiously or ideologically motivated, it's not a ton of incentives to search broadly to find the DAF that best aligns with your values, right? So I do think that they are underused. I think that everyone should have a donor advised fund, whether you're giving away hundreds of millions of dollars or you're more in my category of eking out a couple of thousand a year. Either way, it's a great vehicle. I do think I tend to see the group into two different groups of people using DAFs. And again, Peter and Gabe could speak to this much better, I'm sure. But you see the people who want to use the donor advised fund to kind of put money in it and then because they're still actively kind of mid-career building their assets, building their wealth. They're putting money into the DAF and they want to come back to it later. I mean, they might be making small gifts out of it, not no giving out of it. That's one category. And then the other category is people who are using their DAF in the place of a private foundation as their primary giving vehicle. And those people tend to be really engaged and granting a lot and, either full-time philanthropy or more than half time engaged with their philanthropy. Although Gabe and Peter, you're welcome to contradict me on that because you guys know this space very well.
Well, this is a setup for exactly going down this road.
Perfect.
So let me get to Gabe. Gabe, why should a conservative or maybe I should say non-leftist, something non-woke. Why should someone like that find particular virtue in DAFs such as the Bradley Impact Fund, as opposed to DAFs managed by financial giants? And after you answer that, I want you to also then tell us what was it that made the Bradley Impact Fund come into existence? So.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think a couple of reasons, and whether it's a DAF like the Bradley Impact Fund, or Donors Trust, or NCF like Celia mentioned, Knights of Columbus, Signatory, Waterstone. I mean, there are a number of more kind of mission aligned options that donors can choose from. But I think why is from the standpoint of the protection of donor intent and organizations that you may want to advise, support to now and in the future, who you choosing a partner that shares your values, that shares your principles, and especially what we've seen over the past 5 years. I think both now, but then going forward into the future, and because it's are you operating a donor advised fund sponsor because it's a great service for your clients who you're managing their investments, or is the DAF exist to help donors give to organizations that they care about in their communities around the country, public policy or otherwise. And then from a standpoint of all DAFs in one way or another, there's a cost, there's a fee associated with it. And so what do those fees end up going to? Do they support the mission and programs? We host a number of events and conferences for donors, and do a lot of advisory work as well. And so do your fees go to promote things like that, or do they go to pay for programs and operations and things that might be at the very least not greatly aligned with the things you care about? So these are just factors to weigh as you consider what's the right giving vehicle.
Tell us why, what was the historical reason for the launch of the Impact Fund?
Yeah, I guess long story, medium length. I found a reference to it back in 1999. The board of the Lyndon Harry Bradley Foundation, which is a conservative grant-making institution that's been around for more than 4 decades. You have folks like Victor Davis Hanson, Robbie George, Paul Clement, Gene Scalia, and go on and on with the board of directors there. But they had some had a work with a prior iteration of NCF that was a Christian DAF here in Wisconsin. And it was, is there a vehicle, a way to help donors give to things that they care about, where there's great alignment, and what might that look like? And so fast forward to 2013, the Impact Fund opened its doors, and to the best of my knowledge, and maybe someone can chime in the chat and tell me where I'm wrong, I think it's the only private foundation that has this sort of alignment with a DAF in the country to date. And so it was an interesting proposition, but that the Bradley Foundation is always looking at grant making a little bit different, and making investments over the long term. And so capitalizing the Impact Fund was something that they wanted to do to help conservative donors give and protect their donor intent now and in the future.
Yeah, Gabe, I've heard you tell a couple of war stories in the past about donors who had their DAFs at major firms whose advice was not taken, whose advice was rejected. And I wish you could share with us 1 or 2 anecdotes. And Peter, I'm going to follow up with you along the same lines. I find it shocking sometimes what institutions are considered by some major financial firms as unworthy of receiving funds. But please tell us a story or 2.
Sure. So actually, I mean, going back to when it started for us, and we're actually upfront with folks who want to give with us and advise grants. If we won't make grants to organizations that are antithetical to our mission, to our guiding principles. Now that may not be as upfront with some other DAF sponsors, but it was Giving Tuesday in 2019. Received a phone call from one of the larger, more prominent right of center organizations in the country that a number of their donors weren't able to advise grants from their DAF accounts to support the mission. And this was an organization in good standing with the IRS. And they were just saying no to donors, which again, people legally, technically are giving money away when they open accounts. So it's perfectly legal and within their rights. However, if you just anecdotally, the donors that we were helping facilitate giving to this organization, you total it up, this would be a conservative or small c conservative estimate. It was about 47% of all assets held in donor advised funds could not be granted to this conservative organization. So if you kind of look at recent National Philanthropic Trust study on DAFs, I mean, that's something like $110 billion that cannot be granted to this organization. And this is continued in different iterations across the country. And it's not just large financial institutions being influenced. A couple of years ago, Jeremy Tedesco from Alliance Defending Freedom wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal talking about the pressure campaign against Fidelity Charitable with some of their grant making to conservative organizations. But we've seen community foundations as well who are using kind of third party screens from people screening for quote unquote hate groups in otherwise to not do grant making. So this problem continues.
Peter, you walked in these same fields, down these paths. What have you heard? What's your experience from hearing from some donors who have been blocked from their intent?
Yeah, well, like with Gabe as well, it was a great business opportunity for us, right? I mean, there were a lot of people who were really disenfranchised by some of these, particularly Fidelity Charitable. Fidelity Charitable really was the worst offender, although Goldman Sachs's donor advised fund was pretty bad. A few of the others, and then, like Gabe said, the community foundations. And we had a woman who gave a gift to Turning Point USA, just fine and dandy, went to do it again, and they said, we don't like Turning Point USA anymore. And we heard the same thing for Project Veritas, Alliance Defending Freedom, a couple of Jewish groups, a whole slew of organizations that were getting turned down. And the crux of it, the problem here, as Gabe said, a donor advised fund can say no. You should be clear on the outset. Like, we are also clear at the front end that we won't give gifts to organizations that take a lot of government money or try to grow the size and scope of government. Those are our bounds, and we're clear on that. As one donor who came over to us from Fidelity said, there was a gentleman's agreement that they were going to give to any nonprofit, and they broke the gentleman's agreement. And I thought that was a good way to put it, that if you don't have these rules in place, or if you think you have rules in place and then break them, you're losing that trust, and it's not good for philanthropy in general. So, and we are seeing this continue. Just the other day, I was talking to a person who is involved with, I think that's Southeastern Michigan Community Foundation, and they've backed this off, but they were going to look at Southern Poverty Law Center and other places to try to figure out what's a good group to give to, what's a bad group to give to, and they were going to reject a gift to the Heritage Foundation based on some of these screens. Like I said, they've backed off of it, which is great, but it's still pervasive out there.
My understanding, I used to be on the board, is, I was the publisher of National Review, which is a company. It's not a nonprofit, but the related nonprofit had a donor advised fund attempt that was very slow walked. Also, it's not just denial, but sometimes these things are just like months and months and months. Like, why? What do we have the cooties? How do you get the cooties in this world?
Well, and what's so frustrating there too is that if you're a $10 million donor, a big old donor, you can probably get the right person on the phone at some of these larger donor advised funds to eventually get that slow walk gift pushed through. But if you're, just a retail giver, if you're giving $10,000, $20,000 a year, you're getting the phone tree, and you're getting somebody one call and another person the next call, and they don't like your politics and they say no. And it's just, it's not the way it should be done.
I just want to draw attention. I don't know if everyone who is participating or viewing, there's a chat function here, and my neighbor, my friend Sharon Capetto, who works at the New Haven Community Fund, she's put up a link to. You just mentioned it, Gabe, the National Philanthropic Trust staff report. So if people are interested in that, they can check that out. If you can't see it, my colleague Caitlin Nocera, who I thank very much for helping with this webinar, and Joe Garect also deserves thanks. Caitlin can make that visible. One or two commercials quickly for the center. On December 5th, the center, which hosts educational webinars and sessions, has a 3-hour webinar on elements of grant writing. If you go to centerforcivilsociety.org, you'll click on events, you'll find that masterclass available. And on December 12th, a free webinar from 3 to 4 in the afternoon. We call it the Scotch Talk. I guess you're supposed to bring scotch, a glass of scotch or something with you. Getting your foot in the door, how to successfully engage your foundation prospects. Do check that out. Peter, sticking with you, before we get to some of the more constitutional matters here, if there is one principal reason why donors say they want to be engaged with Donors Trust, what is it? And there may be no answer to this, but of late, is there any growing or heightening motivation you're sensing from people who are joining? Again, we'll talk about it. The word member, join, I want to get to that later, but Donors Trust.
I think top line is just the desire to be aligned with other people who understand and actually share your values, that aren't going to question them. You know, they understand that you have a perspective and you want to give in that way, and that's fine and good. And so it's not even necessarily agreeing with everything. I mean, we've got, you know, we're big tent conservatives. So we've got the conservatives and the neocons and libertarians and the faith-based only. You know, they're all under this tent together, of not wanting government to grow, et cetera, and using private philanthropy. But at the core of it all is this idea of donor intent, and that you as the donor, you made the money, you have the money, you should be able to decide where it goes. And so coupling that donor intent with the principles alignment and that shared values, I think really is, you know, the big reason why folks engage with us, because donor advised funds aren't novel anymore, right? People understand what they are. This time, you know, for the next few weeks, you're going to see articles in Forbes and Business Insider about you should be using a donor advised fund, like clockwork. They come out this time, and tax time. People understand that it's a valuable tool. Now they're starting to understand more and more. They don't just have to go to the default option of the Fidelity and the Schwab, that they can actually get that extra layer of protection on it too.
I have Celia, I'm not going to make this long-winded, but you at Amphil, at Philanthropy Roundtable, I mean, you've spent a lot of your adult life dealing with donors and what motivates them. And as it applies to DAFs, I'm wondering if you sense, is it small, is it medium, large, like interest in DAFs because of something philosophical, and is that the protection, the anonymity that DAFs provide to donors something you hear regularly, or is it on the margins, if at all?
I think the anonymity is important. From what I've seen, people are choosing DApps primarily because of the ease. It's a lot easier to have an account than it is to set up a private foundation. I would say that, I mean, from where I'm sitting, that it's completely flipped on its head. At this point, it is like the majority of people probably only need a DAF, and the people who are setting up charitable foundations, it's because they have a really, you know, like a family story, it's some kind of family legacy that they really want to protect, or you know, possibly an oversized ego, whatever it is. But you're not seeing as many private foundations. Not that you shouldn't. I mean, there are good reasons, right? If you're going to do philanthropy full time, or you have a large family that you want to involve with your philanthropy or whatever, there can be good reasons to do that. But yeah, it seems to me like more and more people are choosing donor advised funds. I would say that anonymity is one of the big reasons that's the case. And I think that's also one of the big use cases you see for private foundations too, right? Like you can go and look through 990s and realize that gifts to certain groups sort of stopped happening, and instead you started seeing lump gifts over to donor advised funds, sort of in the early 2010s and then onwards. And that's because
Yeah,
of that anonymity, right? The donors were getting harassed about the types of organizations they were supporting, and so they were able to then utilize a DAF to continue giving.
Gabe, you want to say
yeah,
something? Yeah.
yeah. I was just kind of along those lines. I mean, we see a lot of people now from the standpoint of protecting in donor intent. You got the family foundation, you've got multiple generations. You want to make sure that the giving is preserved, and so whether it's
Yeah.
putting it on rails or however you want to talk about it. We've seen a lot of people wind down private family foundations into a DAF, and I would say two other anecdotes. One, we had a donor who had gotten a call from the Washington Post after making a $5,000 gift to Project Veritas, as Peter referenced, and just out of the blue, and he's like, I don't need reporters calling me to talk about this. Making a $5,000 grant, so he chose to do some giving with a donor advised fund. And then the last, just especially during the pandemic, you had a lot of private family foundations or otherwise making grants to local institutions or charities that may kind of be outside what they normally give to in their mission. And so instead of then having that information out there for grant writers and fundraisers to waste their time, because they weren't going to continue doing some of those grants going forward, they were doing things in absolutely unprecedented times. They wanted to give, but then they didn't want to waste fundraisers' time after the fact, so they chose to recommend some gifts with donor advised funds to maintain anonymity with some of what they're giving for that purpose too.
I do want to get deeper into anonymity and constitutional matters here, but there is a question from Mark B. I'll throw it out there, if Peter or Gabe, you feel like answering it. Is anybody using, quote, the savings account side of DAFs as a tool to invest in non-liquid, mission-aligned enterprises, not just ETF, ESG securities?
So I think what he's referencing is kind of the impact investing side, where you can use charitable dollars to kind of support in a for-profit way, a social enterprise, or even something that's not as social. It is possible. There's actually a great DAF that really specializes in this called Impact Assets, that helps a lot of other DAFs do this. It's not something we've engaged with, but I was having a conversation about this very thing with somebody just the other day, and it's an interesting way to have dollars that you aren't going to be needing to go to charitable causes, C3 charitable causes, on a short time horizon. If you've got a longer time horizon with some of those, you could then invest them with a bodega in Mexico, or some kind of Christian outreach organization, or an apartment building that's going to house artists, whatever it is, something with some kind of mission. And then once that kicks back a return, that money goes back into your donor advised fund. So it's never actually left the donor advised fund to a certain extent. And then if it made a 5% growth, 10% growth, then you have more money to give away long term.
On anonymity, we know the case of Brendan Eich, who was the founder of Mozilla. And it's just, I don't think this has anything to do with the DAF per se, but he gave a contribution to a California, I think it was either for same-sex marriage or against gay marriage, some referendum. That news came out. I think he gave a very small donation, essentially, and he was canceled over it. And that, I think, sent significant shockwaves through the donor community. DAFs do provide anonymity. Do you think this is, Peter first and then Gabe, is anonymity something that conservatives, philanthropists, are embracing because of the consequences of not being anonymous?
Yeah, I think it's something that is, particularly in this era that we're in, where we don't necessarily have all the ink, although maybe the last election showed that the media landscape is a little bit bigger, and we can get two sides of a story out now. But, there's a lot of people who like to make hay about conservative causes, even when there's no there, right? People, just like the story that Gabe said about the guy that gave to Project Veritas. We don't know why he gave there. Maybe he liked some very innocuous video that James O'Keefe did. Who knows? But that nuance gets lost in the way people get dragged through the mud, and nobody wants to get dragged through the mud. Now, I will say, there is particularly people who are opposed to donor advised funds bring up the anonymity piece a lot. In as though it was this nefarious thing, right? As though you don't actually already have anonymity in theory if you give to any nonprofit, right? Those donations are not publicly disclosed. Yes, there's some tax filings that shouldn't be public, et cetera, but the donor advised fund just creates an extra layer of that privacy. So you give to Donors Trust makes a grant to whatever group, and then that gift to that group can go out as an anonymous gift from a funder at Donors Trust, right? So you're creating these layers, but most gifts nationally, most gifts with Donors Trust, I'm sure it's true at Bradley as well, don't actually go out anonymously. Most people actually want their name on there. And so it's kind of a little bit of a myth and some myth making by people who hate donor advised funds that they're all this big money anonymous people. No, it's a lot of small dollar people who want their name to go out to charities across the country.
Gabe, if you have anything to say, but I don't think the myth makers are, you didn't say this, Peter, that there are big, powerful entities that are engaged in this myth making. We can get to that in a minute or two. Gabe, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, no, I just agree with that. Echo everything that Peter said, and I'd say it's not a conspiracy theory, kind of a leak illegally of donor information. I mean, a few years ago, well, I forget when the sentencing was, but a contractor for the IRS went to jail after leaking the private confidential tax returns of thousands of Americans. So, for donors who want to maintain their privacy and association, it's not a unfounded concern in this day and age where we're at, unfortunately.
Well, we had a very significant First Amendment case in 2021, Americans for Prosperity versus Bonta, who was the California Attorney General. I think he was probably the third or fourth AG on this particular case, which stretched out. Was the AG's office wanting to get access to these contributor records? The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 against the regulation, but there is a desire of the bureaucratic state to get this information, which is protected by, well, it had been protected by the Supreme Court. I mean, there was a significant case. This is not some right-wing conspiracy. The anonymity of donors came about through the 1958 case to protect the donors to the NAACP. Because rightly, the state, I think it was Arkansas or Alabama, they want to know who was giving money. So what good was going to come out of that? We know what bad was going to come out of that. So anyway, there is this bureaucratic desire, and there's also a legislative desire. On that same case, the AFP case, I don't know, a dozen or so senators, they were all Democrats, and being partisan here, but that's the case, filed an amicus brief, and they were very aggressive of wanting the revealing of donor names. So therefore, I think they have a particular animus against staffs because of that extra layer of protection. Any thoughts, response to that rambling, Peter or Gabe?
Sure.
Gabe.
Well, I mean, I think sure. I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding of the reason why having a privacy and the right to association is important. I mean, they again, I wouldn't speak for them, but what are the reasons why? And I think it's to apply pressure to get people to not give or to not associate, and it's fundamentally un-American. to have that desire to push for that, or maybe it's just in terms of raw politics, trying to have less funds go to organizations that believe in free enterprise and free markets and constitutional order and in what have you. So I think it's it's very un-American, but it's also just a fundamental misunderstanding of philanthropy as well.
And it's worth noting this: the donor privacy piece is not a partisan issue, because there are terrible Republicans on this, just like there are terrible Democrats. I mean, the AFP was from a overreaching attorney general. I think her name was Kamala Harris, who started that case. But Idaho is the Republicans in Idaho, I think it is, are just terrible on donor privacy stuff. And so this is a battle that has to be fought on both sides, because I don't want a IRS under Joe Biden pulling out stuff any more than I want that happening under an administration under Trump, right? Because anybody can target a political opponent, and the whole point of donor privacy is that you shouldn't be able to do that.
I have a question about, and Celia, I guess I have a question for you related to big philanthropy and its attitude towards donor advised funds, and how much donor advised funds actually give out relative to how much a big philanthropy gives up. But there is a question, I'm going to put it out there for Peter or Gabe or Celia, if you want to join in. This is from Anita. Excuse me, how does the DAF invest funds until the donor advises which nonprofit, and how much the DAF ultimately donates? Okay, so how does the DAF invest the funds until the advising happens?
I mean, it really depends on the donor advised fund, right? I mean, if you're at Fidelity Charitable, they give you a bunch of Fidelity accounts that you can invest in. Here at Donors Trust, we've got about 12 different investment options, 3 managed, mostly ETFs. Sometimes people recommend other options. Larger accounts can recommend outside investment advisors. So there's a lot of different things that you can do. I mean, our focus, we very much don't view ourselves as an investment house. We view ourselves as a philanthropic house. And so we worry less about the investments than that. But there's lots of ways that they can be done. But it's all, at the end of the day, it's all got to go out to charity one way or the other.
Yeah. Gabe, if you don't have anything else, I do have a question for you on the big philanthropy. We know by the law you have to give out a minimum of 5%, and that's what we see in most, even Kellogg, Ford Foundation, Pew, etc., MacArthur. What does a typical DAF give out on an annual basis relative to that?
Yeah, I think nationally, and I think by type of DAF, as Peter was talking about, from mission to it varies, but I mean it's generally speaking over 20%.
It's about 18%. Yeah, 12 to
18%. Our payout rates are significantly higher than that on an annual basis. But I mean, I think it's a question of increased regulation, increased hoops. That means that's more time that our team is going to have to spend in compliance, as opposed to working with donors, connecting to great missions of charities in their communities and across the country to support. So if you're going to regulate something, you're going to get less of it. And if you're setting any sort of mandatory payout rates, I'm not sure you might actually get them. You might be setting ceilings instead of floors.
We have about 12 minutes left. I want to get a quick question in, and then I want to flip things about donor advised funds, because I assume there's a role you all play in advising the donors what's out there in the wide world of charity. But I have a question here from Anita. Can the donor recommend that its funds are invested in hard assets such as silver until they're ready to donate to a nonprofit? How does that apply to Bradley Impact Fund or Donors Trust?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're pretty similar with Donors Trust from the standpoint of we have a number of investment options, but then donors can also recommend in their own advisors and investment strategies as well. So it's really, when we talk about donor intent, it extends to how the funds are invested as well.
Donors come in all shapes and sizes, right? And Celia, I'd like to let's talk about the relational aspect of your jobs. Celia, do you find the donors and the foundations you work with are increasingly interested, want to know more about what is the world of, what are the nonprofit options out there for them, the recipients of their charity? Is that just a consistent, or is that always is it on the increase?
I think it's pretty consistent.
Okay.
I think that it's sort of part of your individual donor journey is going from, I've just started giving, I'm kind of dipping my toes in to, okay, I'm getting serious. I'm starting to have questions about this organization that I've been supporting, right? And it's usually something like, okay, they said they did a capital campaign. I never heard if they finished it. I can't see anything on the website. What happened to that capital campaign or whatever it is, right?
Right.
So I don't think it's so much a trend of I'm really interested in my grantees. I think it's just just depends on where you are as a giver. Are you still working full time? Are you mid career? Do you have small kids? What's going on? But I do think that at some point, most donors will sort of have a moment where they kind of are like, I would like to know more about this group that I've been giving to, or this group that I've heard of. You're also seeing, donors are doing podcasts, and we have clients coming to me being like, "Hey, I just joined this podcast for this group. Is it a good group? Do you think should I be giving to them?" So that's a big part of what we do is research like that. Just I came across these folks. What do you think? Here's a business card.
Yeah. Okay. Let's Peter, on your through Donors Trust. How do you do you feel an obligation to the members, and we're going to get to that at the end, very end, to advise them at all? What's knowing that their interests how do you take in the world of the nonprofitry to advise donors, backwards?
Yeah, and one thing, I mean, a trend we've seen is certainly more and more donors are coming to us looking for that advice. They're asking questions, they want recommendations. And so we've actually really ramped up. I mean, we've always talked to nonprofits, we've always tried to understand it, but really systematized that to meet with them, give space for them, actually read the emails that many of you on the call may just delete when they come through on a nonprofit. We try to read those and understand what they're doing, do certain targeted emails just to expose things that they wouldn't have otherwise come across, right? That's why we have our podcast, our Giving Ventures podcast, where we feature different groups around topics that people may be interested in, because there's just so much going on. And I mean, we on this call are literally paid to pay attention to this stuff.
Right.
But as Cecilia said earlier, giving away money is hard. It is harder, and you want to do it right, and you think you have an obligation to this money, and you do have an obligation. And the best place to give may be an organization you haven't heard of yet. And so we view our role as trying to connect the dots where we can.
Are you allowed to say what kind of formal process you have for a nonprofit getting before you and your colleagues to apprise them?
No, that's all black magic. We can't
Okay.
tell. We can't give any. No, I mean, we offer some times, and people will come to us and say, we really want to give a briefing, and we've got, we used to do that, and we're like, well, we'll find some time. Does this work? Does this work? We actually set up some regular times that people can sign up with, and we don't necessarily accept all of them. Some of them don't make sense for a big group call, but where we do,
Okay.
we want to hear.
Gabe, how do you learn more about the wide world of right of center charity?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Peter, we spend a lot of time with different organizations, and it's really you can read an annual report, you can read a 990, but building relationships with people and getting to know them, it's very much a kind of a chef's not restaurants approach to grant making. And I mean, if it always comes down to people. So if you have great people doing great things, you're going to want to invest with them. And we're very blessed to be aligned with our friends at the Bradley Foundation, who also do this full time. And so we spend a lot of time going back and forth with different organizations as well.
Gabe, you do have a sense at Bradley Impact Fund of we band of brothers and sisters. I mean, there's a community mindset there, yes. And would you talk about that and how that operates on an annual basis?
Sure. Yeah. No, we've been very lucky. We host a couple larger events where it's kind of an opportunity for donors who have all kinds of different interests to come together, and no one's you're going to meet all kinds of different organizations, begin to get to know them, and you're not being solicited or asked, or there's not a once in a lifetime matching gift opportunity that pops up in the middle of a dinner. Just get a chance to meet people and build relationships, and then that kind of continues onward in smaller groups, and a lot of donors getting to know each other and investing in similar interests and align things there as well. So it's been a lot of fun and very rewarding for people to get to know each other and for it to grow. So
Peter, how does Donors Trust embrace the idea of community?
I mean, we are for it. Yeah, so we unlike Bradley Impact Fund, we don't do these big gatherings. We tend to do more smaller city-based gatherings. We do a lot of sponsorship of events and try to get together with people there and connect where we can. I found that we had these like 3 couples in Venice, Florida, and they didn't know each other, and we got them all together for dinner, and now they're like going and hanging out with each other, and they're best friends now. Like, you can't replicate that everywhere, but where you can, especially in cities where people feel like they're on an island, New York, San Francisco, LA,
Right.
to bring some of those folks together and make them realize they are not alone. Even if their strategies in philanthropy are completely different, they still share this kind of worldview, and to get them together every once in a while is a really nice thing.
Celia, I want you to head us out the door here with some wisdom, because people viewing this they're nonprofit organizations and leadership, and you have some advice for them about how they should be developing internally a DAF strategy. What are some of the pointers that you would advise a nonprofit? You're going to go out there and raise funds. You better have DAF as part of your portfolio.
Yeah. So from the fundraising perspective, there's a couple of things. I mean, the most important thing is don't be annoying. Don't do things to Peter and Gabe that they specifically don't want. So, for example, they do not need a tax receipt in January, right? The donor got the tax receipt when he made the gift to the donor advised fund. So, if you're sending out your, annual tax mailing, you do not need to send a gift receipt to donor advised funds. Um, Another thing to keep in mind is you need to know you need to have your database set up in a way that you can track who is giving through a donor advised fund. If you know your donors have a fund that they give through, you should know that so you can build that relationship. You should not be treating the donor advised fund itself like a donor, because I mean, Gabe and Peter are amazing, but they are not just going out willy-nilly shoving money at all the causes they care about, right? It is the donors are very much advising their funds. So while I highly recommend having a relationship with both Gabe and Peter, they're not necessarily the ones making giving decisions. So you should know the people at your local community foundation. I would argue, if you're a community-based nonprofit, if you are right of center nonprofit, you should know Gabe and Peter. They should know that you exist, the kind of work that you do. You should make sure that you're thanking the actual donors. If you do get a gift from an anonymous, it's not listed, the fund is not named, and the gift is anonymous, you can send a thank you note back to the donor advised fund and ask them to pass it along to the person who it came from. And also you can write in your letter, like, please reach out. We'd love to get to know you. We'd love to connect you, whatever it is. You should also just mention, on your reply forms in direct mail, like, hey, yes, I'd like to make a gift from my donor advised fund, or to just kind of remind people that, like, it's an option, and you would like to encourage people to give to you through any and all vehicles. It's pretty straightforward. I think that's my big advice.
That's very sound
Yeah.
advice, and I think there might be a link to it in our notes. One last question. We have 1 minute left, and that Anita had asked if there was any list, and Gabe, I'll throw this at you. Do you keep a list for donors to consider for specific mission-oriented nonprofits such as Christian youth ministries?
Do we have a specific list for Christian youth ministries?
Or any kind, I guess that
Yeah.
specific, but any other categories, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we do, catalog and group things together for donors who have specific interests to kind of put together. Hey, I'm interested in advancing parental choice in education. I'm interested in kind of teacher retention and pipelines. Are there organizations that address something like this that I might want to know about? And we have kind of write ups and put together information, and then make introductions for something.
And
like
this is
that.
why understanding the donor and the donor's intent
Yeah.
is so important, because there's lots of, Christian schools, but
Right.
maybe they want Christian classical education or Christian, different types, different pedigrees. And so maybe a little of this, but not a little of that. And that's why that relational aspect is so important.
Well, we are at the end. That'll have to be the last word. I very much appreciate Peter, Gabe, Celia for participating and for providing this wisdom to our to folks who joined us. This will be up on YouTube on the Center for Civil Society's YouTube page in a couple of days. Thank you very much, all. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Bye-bye.